Hey there, folks. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from the Philanthropy Mastermind series. So happy to have you back here. We've got another great session ahead for you. And before we dive into all that, I first want to do a couple things, both in terms of thanks and housekeeping. So I'll start with the thanks, and that's to thank not only the people who are going to be joining me to share a lot about the importance of listening to mid-level donors. I would argue listening to all your donors, but they're going to do a deep dive into that subject, which is one that's rarely discussed today, but also thank all of you for hanging out with us today and being a part of the conversation, which you can do both with the chat and with the Q&A. And in fact, I'm going to invite you, or rather encourage you, beg you to go ahead and jump into the chat and say hello and maybe where you're from, which organization you're with, which part of the country or maybe the world you're from, because we find that there are people from all over the world enjoying these sessions with us. So please just jump into the chat and say hello or howdy or whatever you'd like to say. I know that our guests would love that. So we'll look for that as we jump in. I also want to give a big thanks and thank you, Aubrey, for warming that up. Really do appreciate that. Oh, and we've got others too. Kathy, Sophia. Yes, they're going too fast for me, but we see you. And although we can't see your faces or hear your voices, we really do appreciate your being a part of this conversation today. Keep that up. I know that our guests are paying attention, as will I, and our producer, Jack Frost, who is silently in the background, making sure that all the wheels turn in today's session. I also want to thank our sponsor of this series, DonorSearch. We won't be talking much about DonorSearch unless our guests happen to mention them today. It's not through any lack of affection, but this series is a platform they provide so we can have conversations like this one. We've been doing this since 2016. There are over now 570 of these. You can find many of them, at least in the last 2 years, in recordings available to you at the DonorSearch site at donorsearch.net under the resources tab. Please take a look for that. I'm sure you will enjoy them. And while you're there, you can sign up for future programs. And if you're really interested in knowing more about your donors, you can find out a lot about them through DonorSearch, but I'll let you investigate that later. So with that, I want to jump into this subject today, which of course is about listening to your mid-level donors, and welcome my two guests, on kind of an old friend and a new friend in this space, both today with Story Cause, which is a hint about everything we're going to be hearing about today. Kurt Worrell, who is of course the Senior Vice President, Donor Engagement Nonprofit Strategies at Story Cause, and his colleague, Jay Finney, Vice President, Donor Engagement and Nonprofit Strategies at Story Cause. These two gentlemen, I'm not going to go over their bios for you because they'll probably share a little bit about their backgrounds now. But let's put it this way. They have a tremendous amount of experience in this field. And what's interesting to me is they follow that old almost Jerry Panis principle about because of you, meaning that they listen. And that listening is really a powerful part of what makes their methodology work for their clients. And I would argue for all nonprofits to listen first and then get back in touch with people about mission. So where should we start? Kurt, Jay, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here, Jay. And thanks for having us. And thanks for that great intro. I think it really leads into what we're going to talk about. We're going to try to keep this conversational. We have a couple of slides we can jump to and share, and just more of a way for the two of us to keep ourselves on track. I'm Kurt Worrell. As Jay said, I lead this team here at Story Cause. We created this business about 2.5 years ago, but my background has been in fundraising for the last 30 plus years, mostly on the agency side of the world, and have done a lot with telephone in my career as a big part of fundraising. And we're going to share a little bit today about really a different way to engage your donors, or ways to think about engaging your donors. We're going to lean on mid-level donors because this audience, it seems to resonate most with this audience, and it is a bit of an investment. So it seems like a very logical audience to bring this to, but we're going to touch on other audiences as well. Jay, when you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, and I just to build on Jay Frost, what you said, yeah, we should be listening to all of our donors, but we're trying to keep it manageable. So we do tend to lean in on the smaller mid-level population, but certainly some of what we're going to talk about today is applicable across the board. It just becomes a numbers game. Similar background to Kurt. He and I both worked together off and on for 30 years, and as he said, we launched StoryCause 2.5 years ago, really with the idea of helping nonprofits understand why people care and why they give and what's important to them, and then how do you use that information. So that's why Story's in our name, and that's what we're trying to help our clients do.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you both for this. And yeah, I want to echo that again. My point was only that we need to listen to everybody, but in fact, we don't really listen very well, at least in my experience, to mid-level donors. And so that probably causes an interruption in our ability to build those relationships. Is that about right?
I think so. I think what ends up happening is people have an annual, have a sort of a mid-level, or they have a major gift strategy, and they have a lower level annual fund strategy. It's that middle strategy that tends to maybe not be as well thought out, or a little homeless, I guess.
Well, and I'll add to that and say, like, for a lot of folks, mid-level strategy consists of looking at donors in a segment, usually a giving level. And the focus on those donors is it's enhanced offerings, right? It's enhanced digital, it's enhanced direct mail. Maybe they're getting different ask strings, they're getting a little nicer piece in the mail. But it's still sort of that one-way conversation, right? That in annual fund, it's one to many. And with mid-level, we're trying to get to one to some, ideally one to one. And there's some ways that you can start to do that. I think technology is really starting to enable us to do some more of this at scale. And sort of what we're recommending here is not anything revolutionary, right? It's the ability to treat your mid-level much like you do a major donor portfolio. Now, obviously, there's some trade-offs and some things you have to do a little bit differently, but conceptually, that's really what we're talking about.
Yeah, for some reason, I have the Brady Bunch going through my head and the middle child problem, which is the person who gets ignored in that sandwich between the young and the older or more mature, in this case, wealthier donor. So I'm really glad we're talking about this. How do you want to begin? Do you want to start by sharing some of what you have assembled?
Yeah, let's talk about engagement and engaging people. What we're really talking about, and one of the things that we do pretty regularly is we engage donors around their stories. And that means reaching them by the phone typically, and that's inbound and outbound. And it's conducting an interview with them. It's it's asking all the right questions based on where they are in their donor journey. So if they're a brand new donor, what brought you here? What's motivating your first gift? If it's donors that have been with you for a long time, it's what do you care most about, and how are we doing? Are we reporting impact in a way that makes sense to you? Do you feel like your gifts are really making a difference? What do you plan for the future, right? What's your state of consideration? Where are you going with your giving? And again, lots of ways to ask those questions. But I'll let Jay talk to a little bit about story and kind of why it's such a powerful way to engage people.
Yeah. So this is actual data from two of our higher ed clients, and the way we did this was we interviewed alumni. Tell us about your time on campus. What are your favorite things about when you think back? Getting them to remind themselves about, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, and while they were on campus, the friends they made, the professors. When you tell a story like that, it releases oxytocin, and oxytocin is, that love hormone. It's, you get it when you hold a baby, and it releases those, those really sort of strong positive feelings. So we interviewed these college alumni, and we tracked who we talked to, which are the green line folks, and the people we didn't talk to were in the red line. And then what we did with these two colleges that we worked with was we asked them, or they provided the data a year later, to how people reacted to the annual fund outreach, whether that was direct mail, digital, student calling, any of those things. And you can see giving goes up on those people that were interviewed and shared their story. Retention goes up. New donors were much more likely to make their first gift, especially in the 6 months after, but even in the second 6 months after they shared their story. And lapsed donors, very much huge lift in those folks reactivating their giving after they told their story. And we didn't do anything with the story. All we did was have them tell it. And it reminded themselves of, oh, you know what, I did love my time on campus. So that release of oxytocin, that reminding yourself almost of what college meant to you, just meant the next time you get a direct mail piece, you get a digital, you get something delivered via email, a student caller, you're more likely to respond positively. And the other thing that's not on here are just average gift went up on people that told a story for the donors as well. So it makes people feel good. And then there's not an unintended consequence, but a consequence that comes out of that the next time they're asked to make a gift.
And I'll also say in this group, these universities didn't take this information of this person was a storyteller, let me treat them differently, let me do something different. This was completely blind. So these folks this was simply just looking at who engaged and how did they give, how did their giving behaviors change over the course of the year, and nothing else changed. There were no other variables here to motivate them to make their first gift or to retain at a higher level or reactivate. Now, the real power of this is, okay, now let's take those stories and have a very intentional plan after, and you can really start to move these numbers. And so just again, a little bit about how we approach story, how we capture them, and there's a lot of technology out there, and AI is starting to make a lot of things very achievable for a lot of different organizations. But essentially the way that we approach it is we record the conversation, of course, letting the individual know that we're recording the conversation. We translate that voice to text, and then we utilize AI to bring it into a first-person story, to edit into a first-person story, and then share it back with the donor and ask them for their permission to share it back with the organization. So it's, there's a lot of ways to do it, but I share that just to say that this is not super complex technology anymore to be able to achieve that, and to be able to capture this information and store it and use it in a meaningful fashion.
Or just a quick question before you continue, which is, you said you're asking for permission, you're doing that inventory, asking questions. I would love to hear more about that too. I'm sure you'll share the nature of these questions and how they are asked and so forth. But then you said you asked for permission to share the information back with the organization. Do you mean with the staff of the organization, or do you mean with other supporters of the organization? In other words, are you just asking for permission to share the story with the people who are doing this work, or are you using the story as a vehicle to also fundraise?
We do both. And again, it depends on our client preferences. Many will want to solicit that permission themselves before they would use their stories from, let's say, a social media perspective or in an appeal or something along those lines. So it all depends on the intent and how you're reusing their information. But again, most of our partners prefer to garner that permission themselves, but we just want the donor to know, hey, listen, we've captured your story, we're going to share it back. Is that okay?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on that then, because we've talked about this a lot with things like feasibility studies, and organizations can do them internally, or they can work with counsel to do it. In this case, you're providing the efficiency and technology, the whole package as a firm to do this. But I'm wondering, is it also, what's the nature of the relationship that's built between the firm in this case and then the individual? Do they feel like there's a sense that they can say anything they want because they're talking to a third party?
We don't really approach it that way. We're usually approaching it as an extension of the staff. Unlike a feasibility study where you're trying to get the good, the bad,
Right.
You know, what the really have them, and again, these donors are also completely honest with us. You know, quite frankly, you're not going to stop them from sharing what they want to share. If they're upset, they're going to tell you they're upset. But you know, we present ourselves as really an extension of the development team.
Okay, thanks.
And mainly because we're an annual fund. You know, we're typically you know, donors less than $10,000 here in the world we live in. So a little bit more about sort of the power of stories. And you know, DonorSearch does a really great job in terms of screening folks and being able to identify not only capacity, but are they philanthropic. But the piece of the profile that's missing for most of our partners is, am I it? So you may have the dollars, and the person may indicate, look, they give money to a lot of different charities. But the question is am I it? And that's the part of the profile that we're trying to complete. So when we have that conversation with the donor, almost always our first question is, what brought you here? You know, was there an event or an individual that motivated your first gift or motivated your giving? And we, you know, that usually opens the floodgates. Well, you know, I had in the case we do work with a lot of healthcare, it's, well, you know, they saved my life, and you know, I'm forever grateful. In the case of higher education, it may be, you know, I wouldn't be where I am in my career without the education that I received, and I want to give back and make sure others have that opportunity. So it's really trying to understand, how'd you get here, and then secondly, how motivated are you? Understanding what those donor motivations are. And typically in mid-level, what we're trying to do is we're looking at their mid-level, or we're looking at their overall strategic plan, and then presenting to the donor, hey, which of these areas do you hope your giving has the greatest impact in? So that we're aligning with the strategic plan of the organization versus asking that as a wide open question. It's great, and it's a good question to ask, but aligning it with your strategic plan makes a lot more sense to make it actionable for you as you move forward. So what we like to say is, in mid-level, we want to report impact around their areas of interest, and what motivates them, and we want to we want to do our future asking around what motivates them and what they're interested in and where they want to have the greatest impact. I think the other opportunity that you have when you're interviewing a donor is discovering life stage events. Life stage events have probably one of the biggest impacts on somebody's state of consideration. My kids graduated college a couple of years ago. I got a big raise, right? That was finished college educations,
And they moved out apparently because
and they've
yes.
moved out. Yes, they're all off payroll. um, but you know, understanding, you know, are people getting married? Are people retiring? Are people selling their business? Listening for all of those cues and asking those questions is going to indicate, you know, a person's state of consideration or their readiness in terms of, you know, what's going to impact their giving timelines. I talk about this a lot in mid-level as matchmaking, and I think this is all giving, right? We're not going to talk anybody into making a gift. You know, you're not going to convince someone to make a gift. Someone's going to do what's in their heart, and what you want to do is learn what that is, what motivates them, what makes them tick, and then present opportunities that match with their passions. And I know that you know, that sounds very altruistic and maybe a little too much to try to do, but in reality, I think that's all we are, and that's what we strive to do. Improve, you know, again, we talked about in that first slide, improve retention. Once we know their why, that's what we're going to lean into, and let's start to tailor our messaging to focus on what they care about, and that results in improved retention. Plan giving lead generation. Again, in this interview, one of the questions we almost always ask is, you know, hey, have you, you know, a lot of folks like yourself like to name a beneficiary in their will or estate, or a charity they care about as a beneficiary in their will or estate. Have you ever considered that with us? and we try to understand, is it yes, I have considered, or yes, I'm definitely considering, or I would absolutely consider in the future, or that's not something I want to give to. But I'll also say, um, having these interviews with people that have already disclosed that they've made a bequest, and have a bequest intent, I mean, the numbers I've seen are 30 to 40% of those are revocable and never happen. And the other part of this is, how am I there and understanding what that donor's intent is all the time and reaffirming that with them on a regular basis. And having them share their stories is a great way to do that and be able to echo that back to them. I talk about acquisition, and we're not going to talk a ton about this audience today, but we utilize this a lot in the grateful patient world. And again, for us, it's listening for cues of gratitude, and being able to make those asks around that. But acquisition is totally changing, right? The days of dropping a million pieces in the mail and, hey, I got a 2% response in my acquisition, like those days are gone, right? It's a lot harder to acquire new donors. We're seeing that across the board, and everything I've seen in Giving USA, everything we've seen in um, the fundraising effectiveness project is, right, donors are going down. We all know it. So acquiring them is a bit more of a task, which means you need to put more into it. You need to start to create the triggers, be able to put the messaging out there, and then again, let those donors tell you why they're interested out of the gates. And it really sets the basis for a good relationship, for retention, and moving those, I'm going to call them highly highly targeted acquisition donors forward. Um, I think looking at the trends here, and again, we take a lot of these stories and then look for themes. And again, AI allows you to do that. Give me all of the themes. What everybody that's giving in mid-level, what are the 3 things I keep hearing from them? Everybody that just made their first gift, what am I hearing from them? What are they all saying that was their motivating factor? So once you can start to look at that trending, you can use it to drive your creative and your messaging. And we're going to talk even a little bit more about how to use some of this in generative AI, and you can really start to create super, or what we call hyper custom appeals. And then lastly, and probably where we're going to spend the most time today, mid-level donor outreach to establish baselines, priorities, and preferences. And we're listening for those cues. And our goal in mid-level all the time is really a couple of things. One, maintaining value, and increasing the value of those donors, retaining them, and ultimately identifying those that are either ready to move to transformational giving via major gift or via plan giving. And this is a perfect audience for this.
And Kurt, before you and Jay continue, I'm curious to know what because we never defined it, what the audience's definition is of mid-level, because it may vary within the audience. And then that may influence some of the questions they ask later about some of the questions you ask, or how you assemble that information afterwards, and then how you utilize it. So I'm interested, folks in the room with us, if you can just tell us what a mid-level donor is, or maybe what your, kind of a modest gift, a mid-sized gift, and a major gift, anything like that you wish to share, kind of give us some context. And then I'd love to hear Jay and Kurt define it from the perspective of the kinds of folks that they typically work with. But it's good to have your context first. I know many places will say a major gift is, $10,000, or it's $100,000, or in some places it's $1 million. And so it varies widely. So we're not getting any responses yet, but if you want to put those in the chat, we would love to hear. So there we go. So Ashton, thank you for being brave there. So $5,000 to $20,000. And another one with 1,000 as a major donor. That's Audrey. Mid-level 2,500. Thank you, Margaret. So we see this wide range. What kinds of things are you thinking about when you think about mid-level, Jay?
Well, it's everybody's, to your point, everybody's got a different sort of definition of it, and there's actual mid-level and
I think we lost your audio, unfortunately.
Oh, you not hear me?
Well, you're a little tinny, unfortunately.
Sorry about that. Is this any better?
A little bit better.
Sorry. So what we end up with is some of it is aspirational. we've got clients that say, well, these people aren't giving at a mid-level, but they look like they could, and we want to include them. So sometimes it's not even people giving at that level. It's people that look like they could give at that level.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it really just varies from organization to organization.
Sure.
What I'll say is a sort of blanket definition that we look at is it's typically $1,000 plus unassigned. For some organizations, that number is higher. For some organizations, that is lower. But in general, that's what we're talking about.
Thanks. I appreciate that definition.
Okay. Sure. So just we were thinking about playing some audio clips, but I'm technically challenged today. So Jay, maybe you want to share a little bit about, kind of what we've learned and some of the questions that we've asked with some of our partners.
And if I'm not coming through, just let me know. It was working fine earlier, but it sounds like maybe it's not working now.
It does sound like, are you using an external mic?
Yeah.
Maybe you can try unplugging that and just using the mic on your laptop. Maybe
Okay, hold
that'll
on.
change things.
Let me see if we can. Does that make any different?
It sounds like you're a little louder, but why don't you go ahead and
Okay.
fire away.
So, just to share some examples of this type of outreach, we did this with Huntsman Cancer with their mid-level donors. And to my earlier point, what we wanted to do initially was get them to share their story. So we asked them to call in. First of all, behaviorally, we wanted to see who took 20 minutes out of their day to call in. I mean, I think we'd all admit we have to care about something deeply to carve that time out. So we did that through email and postcards. And then we did a little bit of outbound telephone outreach as well to these individuals, leading with stewardship. Thank you for your giving. Here's what it's helping Huntsman Cancer do. Tell us why you started giving and get people talking. Maybe they were a patient, maybe their parent was treated there. What's most important to you about the work that Huntsman Cancer does? Again, you're getting them talking. It gets back to that oxytocin. They're thinking about the impact that Huntsman Cancer had on them. Some of these calls ended up being 45 minutes long. There were tears shed. I mean, it was emotional. And we follow that up with, would you be interested in learning about including Huntsman Cancer in your will? We asked, what are your preferred vehicles for giving? So we uncovered 22% of their mid-level donors that give through a DAF. We uncovered 8% of the mid-level donors that had already included Huntsman in their will and hadn't told them. 6% said it was something they were definitely planning on doing. Another 26% said it was something they were interested in learning about. We asked, where does Huntsman fit into your charitable or your philanthropic priorities? Is it the top charity? Is it one of the top? Is it one of many? And 66% of these folks said it was their top charity. The other question we asked in a lot of this is, and we can't be too sort of overt about it, but it's, would you be interested in meeting with leadership about your giving? We don't want to say, hey, do you want to meet with a major gift officer? I'm not sure how many people are going to say yes to that. And I apologize to any major gift officers on the phone. But, would you be interested in meeting with leadership? So again, another question that I like is, would you be interested in taking a tour if that's something that makes sense? Because in your head, you're thinking, now I got to drive downtown, I got to park, I'm going to be gone half a day. So if I say yes, even if I'm not thinking, even if I'm never actually going to do it, that's another nice trigger. Yeah, you know what? I'd be willing to take a half a day and go down there and do that. So it's not just how people respond to this. Some of it is listening for those sort of triggers, and who calls in, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a couple minutes, but it's not just what they say, it's how they say it and how they respond.
I think the other part of this too is, at least, in our world, where we're trying to generate the most effective appeals and the most effective solicitations and raise the most revenue and all of those sorts of things. You're always in your creative trying to tell a story that's going to resonate with the donor. Well, what story resonates with the donor more than their own? And especially in, everybody's cancer journey, I always talk about, is so personal, that, let's rally around their journey and their story. And like, let's make that the focus, and instead of, it's a lot harder for me to identify with somebody else's story and put myself in their shoes, which is, what we often try to do in our appeals. So this kind of puts that on its head. And honestly, it's the reason why Jay and I kind of jumped at the opportunity to start this business, was, that there's no bigger motivating factor or story to tell than the donor's own story. And again, I'm also recommending that you do not mix an appeal when you're doing these. This is a stewardship activity, right? Right. Your conversation here. In fact, when we ask people to call in, we literally put in our messaging, we are not going to ask you for money. This is not a solicitation. We care about your thoughts, your opinions, and your story. That's why we're here. So I think it's really important. And if you want people to be authentic, you sort of have to disarm them that, oh, there's going to be an ask at the end of this conversation. So we lead off the conversation telling them this is not an ask. So just another sort of important point of order. I think we have some other statistics as well.
And same concept here. This is with Covenant House, same method of outreach, and interestingly, some similar numbers too. 6% of their mid-level donors indicated that they give through their DAF. 7% indicated they'd already included Covenant House in their will. 11%, so a little higher there, so they were definitely planning to do so. Similar 28% interested in learning more. 21% said it was their top charity, and 20% said they'd be interested in meeting with leadership. And again, we led this with tell us your story and why you give. In the case of Covenant House, they have, I think it's maybe sort of 5 areas of emphasis. So they wanted to uncover, okay, which one resonates most with you? And that's information then that can be used when, sort of customizing appeals and outreach back to those people down the road. Now you know what they care most about. So it was interesting because, and we've done this with some other folks. A lot of times the numbers are fairly consistent across the board on these types of answers, even if the nonprofits are really different.
Yeah, I can imagine that. One of the things that interests me about this is that they are acquiring their donors differently. It's not just that the missions are different, but some places have had high touch, even if it's only by physical mail or email, and others have been doing events, or if it's a college, they might be inviting them to go to everything all the time. So it's interesting that you'd have this kind of consistent response among people who have had different relationships with these organizations, and the missions are different. Why do you think that is? What is the hunger among these people that finally you've turned on the tap by just starting to ask them some questions?
We like to think that's part of the magic, but I think part of it is they're similar in terms of where they are in their donor journey, right? These are $1,000 plus donors who are in a giving society in both cases, that are, they're getting maybe a little extra, but they're not getting the attention that somebody in a major gift portfolio would receive. And not all of them want that, right? I view this as, one of the activities and again, if there's any major gift officers in the room, please stop me if I'm wrong, but I don't think a lot of major gift officers love cold calling. And we view sort of this approach as, here's where we can get those basic questions answered, and the cream is going to rise to the top. And one of the things that we talk about all the time is, let's meet donors where they are. So, well, we're talking about $1,000 plus unassigned here. When you're in these interviews with these folks, one of the things, and you're asking them, hey, what are you thinking about in your future giving? And the person tells you, I'm retired, I'm on a fixed income, I love you guys, you're my favorite charity, I give you $1,000 a year every November. That's what I'm going to continue to do. I can't do anymore. I wish I could, but I can't. So we take that information and, we look at it and say, okay, so why don't we stop trying to upgrade this donor? They clearly stated what their current situation is. There's certainly a planned giving opportunity here, because everybody's capable of a planned gift. But in terms of where I'm trying to move them, maybe I should honor their wishes in terms of, let's change the way we handle their preferences. Don't send me 10 appeals a year. I'm going to give you my $1,000 in November. You know, maybe it's stewardship and impact that happens throughout the year, and that one ask during that time frame that they've indicated that they want to give. We call those folks settlers, right? We have pioneers and settlers. The pioneers is a different group. The pioneers is a group that they're telling you that they give from their family foundation. They're telling you that you're their top charity. They're telling you what their future plans are for giving and which areas they wish to have the greatest impact. That's somebody that's probably on the move, and somebody that we want to make sure that we're meeting their expectations and meeting them where they are, and looking for those opportunities to develop that one-to-one relationship with those folks. So that's kind of the way we view that world. I think it's asking the right questions for the right audience. So looking at where donors are in their journey, meaning, you know, in the college and university world, when we're talking to young alumni and trying to capture their stories, it's really around, how has this impacted career? How do you wish to participate from an engagement standpoint? Do you want to volunteer? Do you want to go to reunions? Do you want to do some peer-to-peer stuff? You know, what's interesting to you there? Versus, you know, somebody, I'm not going to ask them, are we in the will? You know, to a 28-year-old that is just starting their career. So again, it's the right questions for the right audiences. You know, for new donors, it's why are you here? For what I call second from new. So when I'm trying to get you to make that second gift to where we know retention doubles once you make that second gift, the questions that we ask is more around impact. Do you feel like your gift made a difference? Do you feel like your gift had an impact? What can we do better to show you how you're making a difference here? And making sure, you know, and then asking them about their state of consideration, and you know, would you consider a second gift at a later point, and what would motivate you to do that? You know, from a multi-year and mid-level perspective, you know, when we're talking to mid-level donors, these folks tend to be, you know, we're looking for folks of a certain age to ask the beneficiary question. We're looking for folks that have exhibited a certain amount of and sophistication level with their giving, to talk to them about what their future consideration is. So really just matching the questions to where they are in their journey. So, you know, I mentioned we're using AI to track the themes, why they start giving, where do they want to help, where do they want to make the biggest difference. And we want to also, you know, ask the questions, what are the words that you're hearing that move somebody into a portfolio? What are those magic words? Who's trending that way? What are we seeing? And AI is a super powerful tool to begin to track those themes. I mean, you have to parse these stories up a little bit. It's not like you can just point it at, you know, 100 stories that are, you know, 45 minutes in conversation and let it go. It's manageable and it's doable. And those themes will really kind of bring themselves to the top. Jay, you want to talk about maybe something even a little more creative here?
Yeah, I mean, this is something we've started playing with, taking the story that we captured from, in this case, it's an alum, and creating what we call a hyper-personalized appeal, which is basically taking their story and feeding it back to them as part of an appeal. Or it could be a stewardship piece. As Kurt mentioned, you know, you can use AI now to be able to leverage these stories. You gotta play with it a little bit, and it's not perfect, certainly. But it is something, you know, the theory that we have, and we're just starting to test this, is we saw, you know, that the way giving goes up after somebody tells a story. Will that same thing hold true if you personalize the appeal to them and reminding them, right, you know, in writing there about why they feel the way they do about your school, the hospital, the nonprofit, whatever it might be. So, you know, this is sort of in its infancy, and it's you know, but the technology exists now to start to be able to do this at scale. And so it's pretty exciting. It was interesting. I started talking to potential clients about this a year ago, and everybody said, no, we would never do that. And within 6 months, everybody's like, yeah, you know what, we need to be looking at that. So it's definitely sort of it feels like a sea change in terms of the either inevitability or acceptance of starting to use technology this way to customize outreach and show the donors or the alums, whoever it is, that you know them.
What was the concern before the barrier, and then how did that barrier fall?
I think the concern was just that we used the term AI. I think everybody was a little nervous about that, and that you're losing control of it. I think that people were just nervous about how is this technology going to work. There was, stories of, high school kids writing their whole papers that way, and then having it run through the AI checker and spitting it out and saying we know that this was not written by a human being. It's the same. I think people had just sort of a negative connotation to it. I think maybe people started accepting it a little bit more as they just got more comfortable with AI and with some of what's good and some of what's bad and some of mostly what it can do. So I think people realized, okay, it's we can all talk about should we be nervous about AI in the future, but there are practical applications for it, especially in fundraising. I know there's a lot of discussion about it in the last year. So I think people just got a little more comfortable.
And with generative, AI, a lot of folks are saying, I want to write an appeal that talks about this, or they'll, I know I've used it in the past to say, give me 12 headlines for this appeal that I'm doing, and then sort of make them your own, and it just sort of sparks some interest. But we're really looking at this as now we're taking the individual story, and as opposed to just pulling something out of thin air and putting the words together. What we want to really, what this is about is showing the donor that you know them, that you listen to them, and that you're paying attention. That's really the number one goal here.
We did have a question from Audrey in the audience, and I have a thought on this, but I'd love to hear what the two of you think, which is, how do you suggest implementing these techniques if your organization doesn't have access to AI?
I think that there's a lot of partners out there that can support you in this today. Is it not accessed because of a policy, or is it not accessed because bringing that technology under the roof and funding it is a non-starter?
Yeah, and that's something that, and Audrey, feel free to respond to that, but that's one thing. If it's a policy matter, then I can imagine that would be true whether you're trying to do this internally or whether you're doing it with any kind of vendor, because a lot of the services now, including probably whatever software we're using for a CRM to manage our work there, or whether it's prospect research, or for that matter, when we go and we do something on Netflix, AI is a component of that. So it's kind of complicated. And Audrey did respond saying funding issue, and the list of our staff board are of much older generation and would have no interest in AI. I think this is something that, in fact, Jay was just addressing, right? That there are some barriers that are psychological, and sometimes it takes a while to overcome those. In fact, if you guys don't mind, just one thought on this is that we're talking here about these mid-level donors, and however you're defining them, and trying to find a way to go from this great mass of people to the people who are engaged with you at a certain level, but you're really listening to them and then finding a way to create personalized outreach. But even with this series, there's a survey at the end of each session, and we've had a pretty good response. People just telling us whether or not they like what they're hearing, but also what they'd like to see in the future. And I'm able to take that myself and just take that one column, so it's anonymized, just the data saying what people would like to see and hear in the future, and dropping that into something like ChatGPT just to find out what are the common themes among what people want to see in future sessions. So that way, ChatGPT is not exposed to your name or my name. All they know is somebody wants to see more on planned giving, and someone else wants to hear more about special events. So there are different ways to sometimes address this if you can overcome the psychological hurdle rather.
Yeah.
Yeah,
please.
Chat GPT has a free version. From that perspective, in terms of the older board members, maybe don't use the term AI. Come up with something else, because I do think people have a negative connotation to it, and I know. I've talked to folks that are like, oh, we don't like AI, and I'm not sure all those folks could even really explain what it is, but it's just they're against it. So,
well, I think it's also important to have some guidelines and use it responsibly. Like you said, you're putting this information out in the public domain, so I wouldn't want to put anything that resembles PII into into an AI story. But if I'm simply utilizing it to reframe a conversation and show somebody I know, I think we're in pretty harmless territory there. Some folks may feel differently about it, and again, I know some organizations have policies and are working towards policies, and I think that's smart. And we're trying to use it ethically and be smart about it.
And Jack just made a note in here that Microsoft itself is referring often to this as machine learning. And sometimes these terms are interchangeable, sometimes they're not. But I think we're all trying to find a common language, both for understanding things, but also to decrease kind of a natural anxiety about things that are new. And each of us come to that differently. And we have another comment from Ramsey addressing Audrey. So I'll point that out. We also had a couple of folks asking about the recording of this session. We are recording it. It will be placed with Jay's and Kurt's permission in the library of recordings at DonorSearch.net under the resources tab, along with a recording on the DonorSearch YouTube channel. And there's going to be an email coming to you in the next little bit, about the next 24 hours, with a link to this recording. So don't go away. Keep asking your questions and listen to the rest of this. But you can rest assured that when it comes up, that discussion about AI or any of this, including surveying donors at the most basic level, please use this content to generate discussion within your organization. Sorry, please go ahead, Kurt.
No, that's all good, and I want to definitely leave some time here for questions from the group. But just to sort of wrap up on mid-level and talk a little bit about key performance indicators and kind of what we want to look at. Here's the things that we're trying to achieve. And again, the interview being the baseline for it. And then we want to create other events around it. And typically in our world, what we want to do next is we want to take that interview. We want to take what they care about and where their future giving is focused, and start to customize appeals to them. So if there's 3 or 5 pillars of your strategic plan, that we're asking those donors in the interview, point us in a direction. Where do you want to have the greatest impact? And then we want to come back to them multiple times, report impact around the areas that they told us they cared about. And then we want to do an ask. And that ask is, again, based on where they are. So if that ask is to what I was referring to as the settlers before, it's just simply renew your gift at the $1,000 level. But for those pioneers, I want to see if I can motivate those folks to get to a tipping point gift. And what I call a tipping point gift is it's statistically, it depends on what your major gift mark is. But if your major gift level is $10,000, for example, a tipping point gift is a single gift of $3,000 or more. That's a point. If they make that gift, the chances of them being able to make that $10,000 gift with their capacity rating is significantly higher. So that's kind of the progression that we want to go through. And we want to take that opportunity to talk to those donors each year, because state of consideration changes. Those life stage events change year over year. So this isn't kind of a one and done. This is, it's asking different questions. It's tell me your story again. It's reminding them why they care, and reorienting them with their reason for giving or reason for supporting. So we look at segment revenue, we look at average donor value, we look at the revenue performance from the folks that did move to portfolio. We look at donors retained overall, donors retained at the mid-level giving level, and then donors retained that move to portfolio. And then the other part of this is growth of that segment, right? We want to continually be moving people to this level. So having that strategy for the level below mid-level, how am I going to grow the segment? How am I going to bring new donors in here? And having a strategy for each of those is also an important part of it. Like I said, the outreach for us tends to be, surveys, interviews, invites, impact reporting, what I'm calling prospectus, which is, focusing on one significant appeal a year. That may take the shape of a campaign. If somebody's in the middle of a campaign, using those campaign themes, having these mid-level donors hear the word campaign for the first time, maybe having them make a pledge that's going to last for a year or two to participate in the campaign. And if you can bring together, 100 mid-level donors at a $5,000 gift, you've got yourself a major gift. So it's well worth on a lot of levels pursuing that. And then, how do we steward these guys? Newsletters? Are we going to have a name society? Are there going to be benefits? Things like that. Keys to success. We always say play the long game. This is not going to happen overnight. We want to, not everybody is going to participate with you this way. Not everybody is going to tell you their story. But that's not a reason to stop trying. And we're really, we see an average of 4 years from somebody participating at the mid-level before they make the leap to transformational giving. So be patient. And then focus on qualification, just like a major gift portfolio. Let's qualify folks in the mid-level. And that's really what I was talking again about our pioneers and our settlers and what direction do I want to bring people. And then focus on, your resources, your tactics within your budget, within reason, how, what can you afford to do? And how much of this can you start to introduce into the mix? So with that, I'm not gonna kill everybody with slides here, but I know we're approaching 4:30, so I wanted to take a minute for a couple of questions.
Sure. And if there are more questions out there, we would love to have them. I know one thing that is occurring to me is that the actions you take afterwards reinforce. You were just talking about continuing to go back and inventory or ask people questions because it shows that you've listened and that you care. That's implicit in the messages you send out afterwards, but it's also in going back to survey them again if they're willing to continue having that conversation. That's so important. I assume then that means that before you even begin this whole process, whether they're working with a firm like yours or doing this internally or however they do it, that they need to commit to taking action after they get the responses.
Absolutely. It's, have a plan to do something with this when it's all over.
Right. I'm only saying that because sometimes we've seen that with other things, sometimes where people don't make that commitment up front, but it's worthwhile commitment because you showed all the returns and response rates. I mean, it's clear.
Yeah. I just wanted to put up our contact information as well. So if anybody wants to reach out to Jay or myself directly, this is how you find us.
We'll make sure we put that also in the chat, Jack, if you would. Obviously, both there at Story Cause. And if people want to just learn more about what you do, I'm sure they can go to storycause.com. And I think they can find you both on LinkedIn. Anything else they should be watching for as you all make this journey and help people tell their stories?
Well, we'll be, I think our next conference stop is Bridge and then AHP in the fall. So we'll be out there a little bit and again, available for any questions. And what we do is not a secret. We will share what we do in detail with anyone who wants to listen and feel free to make it your own. We just think it's good practice and we can learn from each other. So, if you're just looking for help me do this better, tell me how to do this better, we can help you there too.
Maybe a final question on all this is you've both been at this work for a long time. Have you had a call from any of the organizations that you've worked with asking you a few of these questions that made you feel really special? Your school or your hospital or?
I have not. One of the things that that I try to do is I make a donation to every organization that we work with, because I want to see their stewardship. I want to see their, their time to respond, how do they thank donors, all of those sorts of things. But no, I mean, I think, this is an investment. So, it's not easy to action 1,000 interviews with your mid-level donors. So,
True.
so, I think it takes some focus and some commitment to make it happen. And like I said, I don't know a lot of people out there doing this that we're, besides us right now. I'm sure that's going to change pretty rapidly, and with the technology. But what we found is it's just a super effective way to engage donors.
Yeah. I only ask that because sometimes it's surprising that we know something that works, but we haven't experienced ourselves, and that's why I was kind of checking. There's this.
How about you, Jay? I mean, what have you had any experience like that?
I have not, and it surprises me because stewardship is the glue of our field. It's the thing that shows that we're paying attention. It's the reason why we continue to give, and no, it's sort of like the physical letters at the end of the year and telephone calls to thank us. These things are rare, and that's why our retention rates are low. And it's not a criticism of us in our field. It's a matter of overcoming an objection maybe on the board, or to finding a few pennies, which is hard to do, in order to invest in a new way to do these things. So I just think it's great that you've shown us what the return can be by asking a few questions of people who care about the same things we do. And hopefully you'll both get a call from your institutions soon, in the same way that you're helping others like Huntsman and Covenant House to inventory their own donors. I appreciate that very much. Thank you both. And I want to thank everybody who's been here with us throughout, and I encourage you to check out these guys' work. And if nothing else, to think about where the stories fit in what you do. I know that all of us would love to be able to tell our story. What's the Dr. Maya Angelou quote? Something about, I don't remember what people said. I don't remember what they showed me, but I always remember how they made me feel. That's not an exact quote, but I think it's something we all understand. So making people feel good is what this is all about. And speaking of making you feel good, we are going to have another session next week to bring you through a whole bunch of policies and procedures that are going to make people feel pretty good. You'll see that on Tuesday. Plus, if you like feeling good about your own accreditation, you'll be happy to know that session is CETA-free accredited. So that's on Tuesday at 3:30. I hope you'll join us for that. You can learn all about that and everything else over the DonorSearch site at DonorSearch.net, and get on our list so you can make sure to receive announcements like that in the future. So until next time, thanks very much for being here. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you all for coming.